Hello there. This one's going to be a little longer, so if you want to break it into two parts, you can do that. We're going to go over blood flow, resistance, and pressure. So you've learned, excuse me, about the different blood vessels. Now we're going to talk about how blood flows and why blood flows and about how that influences pressure and so on. So some basic definitions. And again, you should have these on your PowerPoint, or if you need to stop the video to write some stuff down, go ahead and do that. So blood pressure is basically the force per unit exerted on the wall of a vessel. We need blood pressure. Blood pressure is what allows blood to flow. And blood pressure is what the heart is doing. By exerting a force, the heart is exerting pressure, and that pressure is going to allow blood to move. So we have this tendency to think of blood pressure as a bad thing because you hear about hypertension, which is too high a blood pressure, but we need it. Okay, we need it. Pressure is a good thing. All right, so blood is going to flow from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure, with the highest pressure being closest to the heart because that is closest to the pump that is exerting that pressure. Okay, so you've all heard of blood pressure before. Blood pressure, systolic blood pressure is the top number that you see, and that's the blood pressure during systole or arterial blood pressure. Arteries are going to have a lot higher blood pressure. Remember, we talked about their anatomy. You're going to have a lot higher blood pressure than veins. So systolic blood pressure is the pressure during systole, and that is when the ventricles are contracting. So you're going to have that high number, the top number on blood pressure. The diastolic pressure is the arterial pressure during diastole, so in between beats. So even though the heart's not beating in between beats, there's still a pressure that's exerted against those vessels. And again, um, that should make some sense that the diastolic blood pressure is going to be lower than systolic pressure. Okay, so how can you measure blood pressure? There's direct, they can actually put sensors through a catheter into the heart. Obviously, we don't do that when we go to the doctor, so this is the way you normally take a blood pressure. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but it's an indirect measure of pressure when you're doing this. So if you guys need to know how to do this and what it means, your people in your major will go over that. Hypertension is when blood pressure is too high, and that can lead to the destruction of capillaries, which can lead to kidney problems, eye problems, heart problems, more likely to have a stroke, and so on. Some people have hypotension. Hypotension is when the pressure is too low. I think technically the number is 100 over 70, but I've had times in my life when my pressure is lower than that, and it's fine. But sometimes people get hypotension when they stand up or try to do something, they get so lightheaded. So you need pressure to be exerted against the blood to get it to the brain. So if your blood pressure is too low, then you're not going to get blood to the brain, and that's why you're going to get lightheaded. Orthostatic hypotension is when a person changes positions. If you've ever been to a doctor, I've only had this done once in my life, that they will take your blood pressure when you're laying down, then sitting, then standing. And from lying down to sitting, it should go up because your heart has to work harder to get it to your brain. And when you stand up, your pressure should go up. In some people, if they've been bedridden for a long period of time or for other medical reasons, when they stand up, their blood pressure does not adjust as it should, and that can cause someone to faint. Okay, so what is a pulse? A pulse, some people have the tendency to say it represents your heart beating, but it really doesn't. What you are doing with a pulse is you are feeling a pulse, and so you are actually feeling something happen, and you're not feeling the heart beat. What you are feeling is the difference between systolic and diastolic pressure. So systolic pressure is going to kind of cause the artery to bulge, and then diastolic, it's not going to bulge. You're going to feel that up and down, up and down. So you're actually feeling the differences in pressure. The most common, you can take a pulse anywhere there's an artery. It's easier if it's close to the surface. I do want you to know the radial. Okay, you're not going to feel it on the ulnar side, the radial side. So when you're taking a pulse on the wrist, it's on the thumb side, on the lateral side. Another common place is the carotid on the neck. You need to be very careful with this one though. That's supplying blood to the brain, and so you really don't want to cut off that blood supply. They will use pulses like dorsalis pedis. If someone has an ankle dislocation, they will try to take a pulse, the dorsalis pedis artery. If they're not feeling one, that means that blood flow is not going to that area, and they know they have a pretty serious situation. A popliteal behind the knee, that one's pretty tough to find. Posterior tibial, it's not easy, but it can be found. And again, if you've got a leg injury up here, then you take a pulse down here. to see if blood flow is still going to that area. All right, and so when bears hibernate, they get their heart rate or they get their pulse really low. So there's just a little stupid bear far side for you today. Okay, so we're going to talk about why and how blood flow. Resistance, just think of the word resistance. It's going to oppose the movement. In this case, we're talking about opposing the movement of blood. So this next line right here, that is resistance goes up. And resistance is going to go up the farther you get away from the heart. As resistance goes up, the amount of flow goes down. So blood is not going to flow as much the farther you get from the heart. When resistance goes up and flow goes down, blood pressure goes down. So the blood pressure that you'd get close to the heart is going to be much higher than the pressure that you would get in the arterioles or the capillaries of the body. Okay, so what causes resistance? So as you go from the heart, you're closest to the pump. The blood pressure is going to be the highest, but then as soon as it leaves the heart, it's going to meet resistance. So blood vessel diameter is going to increase resistance. As the diameter goes down, resistance goes up. So the resistance is occurring here on the walls of the blood vessels. And so as you branch and your blood vessels get smaller, there's going to be more cells that are going to be against that wall. And so as blood vessel diameter goes down, resistance goes up because more blood cells are running against that wall. The smaller and smaller blood vessels, you get an increase in resistance. If you get an increase in resistance, you decrease flow and you decrease pressure. So the pressure in this, the pressure here would be higher than the pressure here. Okay, there's something called turbulent flow. I just want to mention turbulent flow is when you get a barrier to flow. This can happen to someone if they have blockages in their carotid artery. When you put a stethoscope up to your carotid artery, you should not hear anything. And when blood flows normally, you should not hear anything. But when you have something blocking its path, then you're going to hear stuff. So and I'm 55 and they've never done this to me, but who knows, they might someday. Put it up to your carotid artery. If they can hear the blood flowing, that means there's some type of turbulent flow there. That's not a good sign. That means that you have some blockage there, and that's a difficult one to do surgery on because of its location. So you can hear turbulent flow. Atherosclerosis is basically, this is an example of atherosclerosis. You get the buildup of plaque. They usually talk about this in terms of arteries in the heart, but it can be anywhere. A heart murmur. A heart murmur is when you get turbulent flow. It's when your valves do not close properly in your heart, so some of the blood is going to go backwards, and when it does that, you get that turbulent flow, and when that happens, you can actually hear that listening in a stethoscope. All right, second cause of resistance is blood viscosity, or the thickness of the blood. The thicker the blood, the more resistance there is. So when you increase viscosity, you increase the thickness of the blood, then it's not going to flow as well. So think about that you've got a big pipe, and in that pipe you put water. That water is going to flow pretty smoothly. There's going to be resistance there, but it's going to continue to flow because the water has a low viscosity. You take that same tube and you put honey in it. That honey is going to come almost to a complete stop because it's so thick. It's so thick that it cannot flow smoothly. Okay? It cannot flow smoothly. So the thicker the blood, the more resistance, the higher viscosity. So we talked about that there's water. When you centrifuge blood, your plasma is mostly water. That's why the water is important. The water is going to be have very little viscosity and it's going to let that blood flow with very little resistance. So if someone becomes severely dehydrated, their blood becomes very thick because they're lacking the plasma. Blood doping. So if someone is taking a drug like EPO that makes them make more red blood cells, what that does is it increases the viscosity of their blood, which means it does not flow as well. The third cause of resistance is the increase in vessel length. So the farther you are from the heart, the longer the blood has traveled, the vessel length is getting longer. You are getting farther away from the source of the pressure. So as you increase vessel length, you're going to increase resistance. I used to have a really long yard. I've sold part of it. And the people that used to live there, they used to plant flowers, and we're talking like a half an acre away. And they had the longest hose to go all the way out to the end of that yard in order to water the flowers. So I was all gung-ho the first year I moved there that I was going to continue to water those flowers. So I turn the spigot on, I drag the hose all the way down to the end, and then I turn it on, and even though I had turned the water on, there was no water coming out of it. So what happened is that water traveled along that hose. The farther you got from the pump, the source, the spigot, the more resistance there was. So it was just such a long hose that by the time the water got to the end of it, there was so little pressure because there was so much resistance. And just so you know, I've cut all those flowers out. I no longer water them. So the farther from the heart, the higher the resistance, the lower the blood flow. Okay, so let's put these three concepts, just a quick review. Maybe. Okay, blood vessel diameter is the diameter gets smaller. As the diameter gets smaller, the resistance goes up, the flow goes down, and the pressure goes down. As your blood gets thicker, you're going to have more resistance, less flow, less pressure. And the farther you get from the source of the pressure, the lower your flow is going to be, the lower your blood pressure because your resistance is high. So resistance, flow, blood pressure. As you increase resistance, you decrease flow, you decrease blood pressure. Okay, so what's going to happen? So we're going to look at this and we're going to start at the aorta where the pressure is going to be the highest, okay, closest to the heart. Here's your systolic pressure. Here's your diastolic. As you get farther away, we're just going to be dealing with one pressure. So we're going to go through this and we're going to go through a bunch of questions. So you might want to draw this or maybe not. It's up to you. And then I'm going to go through a set of questions. I'm not going to answer them the first time through. I want you to answer them. If you feel like I go too fast, then stop the video, answer the question, start it again, go to the next question. Then what I will do is you write your answers down. I will come back and I will go over the answer to each. Now you can just listen to the answer, but that is not making you think. So I want you to think through this to make sure you understand it. Again, this is one of those times where you can take the easy way out, or you can make sure that you're going to learn the material and go through and answer the questions without just listening to the answers. Okay, so here are the questions. So go ahead and read it. I'll give you a little time, then I'll go on to the next one. You just continue to answer them. When we get to the end, I will come back. Okay, I'm going to go back. And again, if you felt like I went too fast, hopefully you stopped the video. Okay, so what happens to blood vessel diameter as the blood goes from the aorta to the capillaries? As you go from aorta and branches into arteries, then smaller arteries into arterioles and capillaries, the diameter is going to decrease. Okay, the diameter is going to decrease. So what happens to blood vessel length as the blood travels from the aorta to the capillaries? The total length that the blood has traveled is going to increase because again, you're getting farther away from the pump. What happens to blood viscosity as blood travels from the aorta to the capillaries? It is not going to change. Okay, so blood viscosity does not change from the time your heart beats the blood and pumps the blood out to the time it gets to your capillaries. So the change in viscosity is going to be a long-term thing that can happen due to, like I said, dehydration and so on. So from the time it goes from your heart to your capillaries, it has not changed its viscosity. So there is no change. What happens to flow as blood travels from the aorta to the capillaries? Flow is going to decrease. Why? Because diameter is going to decrease and the length is going to increase. What happens to resistance as blood travels from the aorta to the capillaries? Resistance is going to increase, which is why flow decreases. What happens to blood pressure as blood travels from the aorta to the capillaries? The blood pressure is going to decrease. Why? Because the resistance went up, the flow goes down, the pressure goes down. We do not want high pressure at the capillaries. We need some pressure in the capillaries, but we don't want a lot. So what will happen if there's too much pressure, those capillaries are so thin that they will end up bursting. So people that have chronic hypertension, okay, have chronic hypertension, high blood pressure, some of the symptoms they start to have over the years is there's a lot of tiny blood vessels in your eye. They can start to rupture. In their kidney, you have a lot of small capillaries. They can start to rupture. Brain, heart. So we need pressure to get to the capillaries, and we even need a little bit of pressure in the capillaries, but we don't want it to be too high. Okay, don't want it to be too high. So really quick, again, just looking at this, so the reason blood flows from here to here is because pressure's high. Pressure goes from high to low. Now, here's where it gets a little more interesting, or a little bit, okay, everything you told us doesn't really apply here. Notice by the time you get to the venules, your pressure's pretty low, and that we don't see a big change in pressure from the time we go from the venules to the vena cava. So how does blood move? I've told you blood moves from here to here, from high pressure to low pressure, but how does blood move here? Good question. All right, so let's go path through these. Okay, so there's very low pressure in the venules and the veins, but the blood still has to get back to your heart. It would be helpful if we had little hearts in your feet and little hearts in your hands. They could pump it back, but that's not the way we evolved. So how do veins allow this to happen? Couple things. One, remember veins have valves. And so what these valves are going to do is as blood flows up here, the valves are going to close and it's going to keep the blood flowing in the correct direction to go towards the heart. So the blood flow can't go backwards. Right? So the valves are going to keep the blood going towards the heart. Now, what moves the blood? Because it's not pressure exerted by a heart. This is the muscle pump and the respiratory pump. So as your muscles contract, they're going to push the blood up because the valves will keep it from going in the other direction. So the muscles are going to exert a pressure against the veins. It's going to push blood in a direction, and the valves are going to stop the blood from going backwards. So you can actually find some of these on your, I have really good ones, and unfortunately the semester of the coronavirus you're not going to get to see them, but you can actually find where the valves are located. You also hear about varicose veins, and varicose veins are usually on the surface, and it's when blood starts to pool here and the vein gets weak. So this is why you do an active cool down when you're exercising. You don't just stop. When most people have a heart attack when they're exercising, it's usually not during the workout, it's right after it, because if you have a weak heart and you just stop and your muscles aren't contracting, then your muscles are not helping push the blood back to your heart. And so if you've got a blockage in your heart and your heart's not getting that blood flow back, that can lead to a heart attack. Also breathing, which most of us do all the time, breathing also helps move the blood back. So all of these work to move the blood in the right direction, and then the valves keep it from going backwards. Another example, and this doesn't matter how old you are, is if you fly, especially long distances, and if you have long legs and you sit in a plane seat and you're not moving your legs when you are flying, what can happen is you're not contracting muscle. The blood's going to kind of pool, and when blood doesn't move, it tends to clot. And then what can happen is you can throw a blood clot that goes up your leg into your heart and then gets stuck somewhere in your lungs. So that's not a good thing. Okay, that's not a good thing. So you always want to keep your legs moving. If you've ever had a surgery, an abdominal surgery or a leg surgery, they will put little, almost like little blood pressure cuffs on your calves, and every few minutes or so, they will pump up and then release. And that's, again, to keep pushing your blood up so your blood does not pool and possibly then throw a blood clot. So this is just a weird, stupid thing that I put on there just to add something. Okay, so I told you this is a long one, so if you're going to take a break, now would be the time to take a break and then come back and watch the rest. Okay, so how can your body adjust its blood pressure? How do we make adjustments to changes in position? You know, in a typical day, your blood pressure can range, you know, from your normal, your systolic can go up. I've had people on treadmills and their systolic blood pressure is up to like 200, and that's okay. Your diastolic should not vary a lot. It should stay pretty much the same, but your systolic can adapt to changes that the body needs to see. Okay, so how do we raise or lower blood pressure? Well, there's two ways we can do it. We can increase or decrease the amount of volume. So if we go back to that example of me trying to water the plants at the end of my yard when I had no pressure, one of the things I could do, okay, is I could go back and I can turn the spigot on and I could add volume. That increase in volume would then increase the pressure in the hose, and then hopefully at the end of the hose I would have enough pressure to water those flowers. So in humans and people and animals that have blood pressure, if you change the amount of water in the blood, then you can change the pressure. So for some people, when they have a lot of salt in their diet, because of osmosis, it's going to bring in more water, and that's going to increase the pressure. And people that have chronic hypertension, one of the type of drugs they take is called a diuretic, which gets rid of some of that water. Okay, so you can change the blood volume. You can't do that really quickly, though. You can't just, you know, I would have to walk all the way back to the house, okay? Your body's going to have to secrete hormones that are going to change the water volume that can change your pressure. So that's not what's going to work if you're going from sitting down to standing. There's not time for that to happen. So the other way your body can adjust pressure is by vasodilation, vaso meaning vessel. Vasodilate means for it to get bigger. The vessel can get bigger, and that would decrease pressure, or vasoconstrict, which means the vessel would get smaller, and then that would increase the pressure. So if we go back to the hose example, if I'm standing at the end of the yard and I don't want to have to go back to increase the pressure, what I could do is I could put my thumb over the end, and what that would do, that would decrease the size, and that's like vasoconstriction, and maybe I could exert enough pressure to get more water out. You've all probably done that before, where you take a hose, you put your thumb on the side, and boom, you see an increase in pressure. So this has the strongest influence and the quickest influence on changing pressure, okay? On changing pressure. So we can increase or decrease blood volume. That can be done by changing water. That can also be done by the heart beating faster to get more blood out. We can also vasoconstrict or vasodilate to change pressure. And that's just showing you that. Okay. All right, how does your blood vessel know to vasoconstrict or vasodilate? The medulla, okay, which you talked about as part of the brain, is going to control blood pressure. Don't worry about that statement. There's just receptors in your body, especially these baroreceptors, that are going to respond to stretch. So if there's a change in position and a change in stretch in blood vessels, they will send a signal, and then the medulla can cause a change in vasoconstriction or vasodilation. There's also hormonal regulation. All I want you to know right now is this, that your kidneys secrete hormones that will influence the water content of your blood. By influencing the water content of your blood, you are going to be able to long-term maintain homeostasis of your blood pressure. Now, in the case of chronic hypertension, you are not maintaining homeostasis. It is higher than it should be, and same thing in the case of hypotension. For now, just know that the kidneys control water content. That's going to control blood pressure. Don't worry about EPO, you should know about, but don't worry about it, and don't worry about this one. All right, last topic. Okay, last topic is blood flow control. Okay, so this would be down here. Let's say this was your quadricep. Okay, this is your quadricep. We've got these things called precapillary sphincters, which is going to control the amount of blood that's going to go into the capillaries of a certain area of the body. Okay, so imagine you're just kind of sitting still, not doing anything. This is what the blood flow in your quadriceps is going to look like. There's going to be some blood flow in there because obviously every cell needs some blood, but there's not going to be a large blood flow. Okay. Okay, so at rest, where is blood flow going? At rest, blood flow is going to be going to all your organs, obviously, but there's going to be a lot more going to your digestive system, primarily because you are digesting food. And to digest food, you have to absorb nutrients, you have to have a blood flow. Okay. But what happens when you start to exercise? How is blood flow going to change? You can't just suddenly make more blood. Okay, the blood you have is going to have to move where it is going. Your heart can pump more out, but your body still has to move the blood that it has to the parts of the body that are necessary. Okay, so at rest, you are going to be sending blood everywhere, but you are going to be sending more to the digestive system. Okay, I'm going to give you a part of the body and you tell me if that blood flow to that part increases, decreases, or stays the same when you start to exercise. So from rest to exercise. Okay, I'm going to give you the parts. I want you to write them down. I want you to stop the video, and then I want you to go increase, decrease, or no change, and then turn the video back on, and I will give you the answers. First part is brain. Second part is skin. Third part is muscles. Fourth is the heart. And then the fifth part is the digestive system. Okay. So increase, decrease, or stay the same from rest to exercise. Stop the video and answer the question for each of those and see if you can explain why. Okay, welcome back. So here we go. Let's go through each of those, okay, and talk about why they do what they do. All right, the brain. Increase, decrease, stay the same. The brain is going to be stay the same. Okay, you do not become stupid when you exercise. Your body does everything it can to keep blood flow consistent to the brain no matter what you are doing. Number 2, skin. Increase, decrease, stay the same. Blood flow to the skin is going to increase because why? Talked about at the beginning of the semester, because blood flow increases to your skin to dissipate that heat. Remember, so it causes you to sweat, evaporates off. So skin's going to increase. The muscles. Muscles are going to increase because you're using the muscles, especially the muscles that you were using. Whoops. Especially the muscles that you were using at the time. It's going to increase. Heart. Increase, decrease, stay the same. Blood flow to the heart's going to increase because your heart's going to have to pump more blood to get it to your body because you're using more. And the last one is digestive system. Increase, decrease, or stay the same. Your digestive system is going to decrease because at that point you've got to have the blood coming from somewhere. It's going to take it from the digestive system and go to the other areas. Okay, go to the other areas. All right. I know this is a long one. Hopefully you split it up into parts. Okay, so you're okay with that. Here, sorry, Bobby, but you know the rule, no swimming for a week after eating. There's this myth that you can't go, you shouldn't go swimming for an hour after eating because your blood flow is going to your digestive system and then your muscles won't get any. In reality, if you went into the pool, you might find it more difficult to exercise, but ultimately your muscles would win out over your digestive system. So the reason that a snake has to wait a week and not an hour is because they eat the thing whole. So it's going to take longer to digest. So there's your little snake trivia for the day. All right, that is the end of this video, which I know is a long one, but we got through it. Okay,